Kethavar received the message while eating his morning meal in the observation deck of the council station. The blue light from his home star reflected off his pale green skin as he read the assignment details on his datapad. Another species. To observe and document. Another primitive civilization to study for the Galactic database. He had done this work for over 200 cycles now and found it mostly boring. The species was called humans, and they lived on a small blue planet in the Outer Rim territories. According to the initial survey, they had just developed basic space travel and were beginning to explore their local system. Their technology was crude compared to most galactic civilizations. They still used chemical explosives for weapons and burned fossil fuels for energy. The Council classified them as a Level 2 civilization, which meant they were barely worth watching. Kethavar sighed and accepted the assignment. As a senior xenobiologist with the Galactic Observation Council, he specialized in documenting military development patterns. His job was to watch how new species learned to fight wars and record their progress. Most species followed predictable paths. First, they would develop better weapons, then better defenses, then better strategies. Eventually, they would join the galactic community as peaceful traders or remain isolated on their home worlds. He packed his equipment and boarded his small research vessel. The ship was equipped with advanced cloaking technology that would make him invisible to human detection systems. His people, the Zephyrians, were naturally peaceful and preferred to observe rather than interfere. They had been studying other species for thousands of years and had never encountered any real surprises. The journey to Earth took 3 standard days. Kethavar spent the time reviewing the preliminary data on humans. They were bipedal mammals, with short lifespans of only 60 to 80 cycles. They reproduced slowly and seemed prone to fighting among themselves over resources, territory, and abstract concepts they called religion and politics. Nothing unusual there. Most primitive species went through similar phases. When he arrived at the human system, Kethavar positioned his ship near their moon, where he could observe their planet without being detected. He activated his monitoring equipment and began scanning human communication frequencies. The first thing he noticed was how much they talked. Human radio waves filled the space around their planet with constant chatter about weather, entertainment, news, and thousands of other topics. He focused his attention on military communications and immediately found several active conflict zones. Humans were fighting wars in at least 6 different locations on their planet. This was not unusual for a Level 2 species, but the scale surprised him. These humans seemed to fight constantly, and over the smallest issues. Kethavar began recording data on a conflict in a desert region where 2 human nations were fighting over territorial boundaries. The technology was exactly what he expected. Ground vehicles with armor plating, flying machines that dropped explosive devices, and soldiers carrying projectile weapons that fired metal bullets using chemical propulsion. Very primitive, but functional. He watched a small unit of human soldiers moving across the desert landscape. Their leader was a female called Lieutenant Jake Morrison, according to the communication intercepts. She was coordinating with another unit led by someone called Sergeant Lisa Davis. The humans seemed to communicate effectively despite the chaos around them. What caught Kethavar's attention was how quickly these humans adapted to changing situations. When their planned route was blocked by enemy forces, they immediately found alternate paths. When their equipment failed, they repaired it using whatever materials were available. When they encountered unexpected resistance, they changed their tactics without waiting for orders from higher command. This kind of flexibility was unusual. Most species Kethavar had observed followed rigid military doctrines and had difficulty adapting when their plans went wrong. These humans seemed to treat every obstacle as just another problem to solve. They showed no signs of panic or confusion, even when their situation became dangerous. Over the next few days, Kethavar documented several human military engagements. Each one showed the same pattern. The humans would encounter difficulties and immediately begin improvising solutions. They used civilian equipment as military tools, created new tactics during active combat, and showed remarkable ability to coordinate complex operations using simple communication methods. The xenobiologist found himself spending more time watching human conflicts than writing reports. These creatures were genuinely interesting in ways he had not expected. They seemed to possess some quality that other species lacked. When faced with superior numbers or better technology, they did not surrender or retreat as military logic suggested they should. Instead, they became more creative and more determined. Kethavar began to suspect that humans might be more than just another primitive species stumbling toward galactic civilization. There was something different about the way they approached problems, especially military problems. They did not just fight to win territory or resources like most species. They seemed to fight because they enjoyed the challenge of solving impossible situations. As he prepared his first official report to the Council, Kethavar decided to recommend extending his observation period. These humans deserved more study than the standard 30-day survey. He had a feeling that they were going to surprise the galactic community in ways no one expected. 3 weeks into his observation mission, Kethavar witnessed something that made him question everything he knew about military behavior. A small human unit had become separated from their main force during a night operation in a mountainous region. The unit consisted of 12 soldiers led by Captain Ryan Hayes, a young human male who appeared to be in his early 30s according to human aging standards. The situation was tactically hopeless. The humans were surrounded by enemy forces, with superior numbers and equipment. Their communication systems had been damaged during the initial engagement, and they had limited ammunition and supplies. Standard galactic military doctrine taught that such situations required immediate surrender to preserve lives and prevent unnecessary casualties. Kethavar expected to document another routine example of primitive warfare ending in predictable defeat. Instead, he watched the humans do something that defied all logical military thinking. Rather than surrender or attempt a desperate frontal assault, they began to systematically turn their environment into a weapon. Private Danny Cooper, a young soldier with basic technical training, started creating explosive devices using components from damaged equipment and common materials found in the area. He combined battery acid from their vehicles with metal fragments and cloth to create crude but effective grenades. Corporal Amy Johnson, who had worked as an electronics technician before joining the military, began modifying their broken radio equipment to intercept and jam enemy communications. The most remarkable thing was how naturally they worked together without formal orders or detailed planning. Each human seemed to instinctively understand what the others were doing and found ways to contribute. Sergeant Bill Turner used his knowledge of local geography to identify weak points in enemy positions. Private Rachel Stone, who had been a chemistry student, helped Danny Cooper improve his improvised explosives using principles of chemical reaction. Kethavar watched in growing amazement as the humans transformed from a defeated unit into something resembling a natural disaster. They used the terrain itself as a weapon, triggering rock slides to block enemy movement and creating diversions that split their opponent's attention. When they needed to move civilians to safety, they somehow managed to coordinate a complex evacuation while maintaining combat effectiveness. The enemy forces, who had appeared to have every advantage, began making mistakes as the humans increased pressure through unpredictable attacks. The opponents were following standard military procedures and could not adapt quickly enough to counter human improvisation. Every time they thought they had contained the situation, the humans would appear somewhere else doing something unexpected. Captain Ryan Hayes demonstrated leadership abilities that impressed even Kethavar's analytical mind. He never seemed to run out of ideas for using available resources in new ways. When his unit needed to cross an area covered by enemy observation, he organized a deception operation using reflective materials and sound equipment to make their opponents think they were attacking from a completely different direction. The most disturbing aspect of human behavior was their apparent enjoyment of the challenge. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, these humans showed no signs of despair or panic. Instead, they seemed energized by the difficult situation. They made jokes while building explosives and sang songs while planning attacks. Their morale actually improved as their circumstances became more dangerous. After 18 hours of continuous combat, the human unit had not only escaped encirclement, but had also rescued a group of civilian refugees who had been trapped in the combat zone. They accomplished this while inflicting significant casualties on a force nearly 3 times their size and better equipped. When relief forces finally arrived, Captain Hayes and his soldiers were in better condition than when the engagement started. Kethvar reviewed his recordings multiple times, trying to understand what he had witnessed. The humans had violated every principle of rational military behavior, yet achieved complete success. They had turned disadvantages into advantages and treated desperate situations as opportunities for creative problem-solving. Most importantly, they had done all this while maintaining concern for non-combatant safety, something most galactic militaries considered a luxury during serious combat. The xenobiologist began researching human history and discovered that this type of behavior was not unusual for their species. Human military records contain thousands of examples of small units achieving impossible victories through improvisation and determination. They had a concept they called thinking outside the box, which seemed to be a fundamental part of their approach to any problem. What made this especially concerning was that the humans involved were not elite special forces or highly trained specialists. They were ordinary soldiers with basic equipment and standard training. If average humans could perform at this level, what might their best military units be capable of accomplishing? Kethvar decided to focus his observations on human special operations forces and elite military units. He needed to understand the full scope of human military potential before filing his report to the Council. The preliminary data suggested that humans might represent something unprecedented in galactic military history. As he prepared to observe more human conflicts, Kethvar felt something he had never experienced during previous observation missions. For the first time in his long career studying primitive species, he was beginning to feel nervous about what he might discover. These humans were not following any known patterns of military development, and their capabilities seemed to grow, stronger under pressure rather than weaker. The xenobiologist made a note in his personal log that human warfare appeared to operate on principles that the galactic community did not understand and might not be prepared to handle if these creatures ever decided to expand beyond their home system. 2 months into his extended observation period, Kethvar decided to monitor a large-scale human conflict to understand how their military principles scaled up from small unit actions. He chose to observe a war between 2 major human nations that had been building tension for several years over trade disputes and territorial claims. The xenobiologist expected to see the typical pattern of galactic warfare. Large armies would face each other in organized battle formations. Advanced technology would determine victory, and the conflict would end when one side's military forces were destroyed or surrendered. Most civilized species conducted war as a formal process with clear rules and predictable outcomes. Instead, Kethvar discovered that humans had developed something they called total war, a concept that seemed to involve their entire civilization rather than just their military forces. When the conflict began, he watched in growing alarm as both human nations transformed their entire societies into military production systems within a matter of weeks. Colonel Brad Nelson, who had been a peacetime administrator, suddenly found himself coordinating the conversion of civilian factories into weapons manufacturing facilities. Engineer Kate Brooks, who had designed bridges and buildings, was now creating fortifications and military equipment. Factory worker Tim Rodriguez, who had assembled consumer electronics, was producing guidance systems for missiles. The speed of this transformation defied everything Kethvar knew about industrial capacity and social organization. Humans seemed capable of redirecting their entire civilization toward military purposes almost overnight. More disturbing was how willingly they made this change. Instead of resisting the disruption to their normal lives, civilian humans embraced their new roles with enthusiasm. What truly shocked the xenobiologist was the human approach to casualties. In galactic warfare, heavy losses typically led to decreased morale and eventual surrender. Humans appeared to have the opposite reaction. When Major Susan Clark's unit suffered 70% casualties during a major engagement, the survivors did not retreat or request reinforcements. Instead, they became more determined and more creative in their tactics. Kethvar watched Major Clark reorganize her remaining soldiers into smaller, more flexible teams that could accomplish missions, originally planned for much larger forces. Rather than accepting reduced capabilities, she found ways to use fewer personnel more effectively. Her unit began achieving objectives that had been considered impossible even when they were at full strength. The pattern repeated across multiple theaters of the conflict. Human military units that suffered heavy casualties did not become weaker or less effective. They became concentrated sources of experience and determination that accomplished far more than their numbers suggested possible. Humans seemed to learn something valuable from every defeat and immediately applied those lessons to future operations. Lieutenant Commander Gary Peterson demonstrated this principle when his naval unit was nearly destroyed in an early engagement. Instead of requesting replacement ships and personnel, he used the surviving resources to develop new tactics that proved devastatingly effective against enemy forces. His innovative approaches were quickly adopted by other human naval units, spreading improved capabilities throughout their fleet. The xenobiologist also observed how humans dealt with technological disadvantages. When one side deployed new weapons or defensive systems, the opposing forces did not simply accept their inferiority and adjust their strategies accordingly. Instead, they immediately began developing countermeasures, using whatever resources were available. Dr. Helen Gray, a civilian scientist working in a university laboratory, received samples of advanced enemy armor materials and within days had developed methods for defeating them using conventional weapons. Her techniques were distributed to frontline units so quickly that the technological advantage lasted less than a week before becoming a liability for those who had deployed it. Most disturbing of all was the human attitude toward the conflict itself. Kethvar expected to observe the typical patterns of war weariness and desire for peace that characterized other species during extended conflicts. Instead, humans like Commander Lisa Brooks and Captain Nick Foster seemed to view the war as an enormous problem-solving exercise that engaged their full creative potential. They spoke about tactical challenges the way other species discussed art or philosophy. They shared innovative solutions with the same enthusiasm that galactic citizens showed for scientific discoveries. They treated impossible situations not as reasons for despair, but as opportunities to prove human ingenuity and determination. The war continued for several months with neither side able to achieve decisive victory despite the massive destruction and casualties involved. Both human nations kept developing new capabilities faster than their opponents could counter them. The conflict had become a test of which society could innovate and adapt more quickly under extreme pressure. Kethvar realized that he was observing something unprecedented in galactic history. These humans were not just fighting a war between two nations. They were using warfare itself as a method for rapidly advancing their technological and tactical capabilities. Each side was essentially helping the other become more dangerous while trying to destroy them. The xenobiologist began to understand that human warfare served purposes beyond simple territorial conquest or resource acquisition. For these creatures, war appeared to be a form of accelerated evolution that forced rapid development of new capabilities and ideas. They were using conflict as a tool for pushing the boundaries of what their species could accomplish. As the large-scale conflict continued, with no clear resolution, Kethvar made a troubling discovery in his analysis of the data. Both human nations were becoming significantly more capable than they had been before the war started. They were not just rebuilding their military forces, they were creating entirely new types of military organization that were more effective than anything they had possessed originally. The xenobiologist realized that regardless of which side eventually won this particular war, the human species as a whole was becoming more dangerous as a result of the conflict. 4 months into his observation mission, Kethvar decided to examine how humans would respond to technological superiority by monitoring a conflict where one side possessed significantly advanced equipment. He expected this scenario to provide clear evidence of human limitations when faced with overwhelming technological disadvantages. The conflict involved a human military unit equipped with standard weapons facing an enemy force that had acquired advanced weapons systems from a more developed nation. The technological gap was substantial. The enemy possessed guided missiles, advanced armor, electronic warfare capabilities, and air superiority. The human unit, led by Sergeant Tony Martinez, had only basic equipment and conventional weapons. According to galactic military science, such overwhelming technological advantage should have resulted in quick and decisive victory for the superior force. Kethvar prepared to document another routine example of technology determining military outcomes. Instead, he witnessed something that challenged everything he understood about warfare and technological development. The humans did not accept their technological inferiority as a permanent condition. Within hours of their first encounter with advanced enemy systems, they began what they called reverse engineering. Sergeant Martinez coordinated teams that recovered pieces of destroyed enemy equipment and immediately began studying how it worked. Private Jennifer Walsh, who had studied engineering before joining the military, led efforts to understand the enemy's guided missile systems. She worked with Corporal Mark Phillips, a former automotive mechanic, to identify the key components and principles. Together, they developed methods for jamming the guidance systems using equipment that could be built with basic electronics and common materials. What amazed Kethvar was the speed of human learning and adaptation. Dr. Helen Gray, who had been working in a nearby research facility, arrived at the combat zone and within days had analyzed captured enemy technology. She not only understood how the advanced systems worked, but had identified ways to improve their performance using human manufacturing techniques. The most disturbing development was when the humans began incorporating enemy technology into their own systems in ways that the original designers had never intended. Lieutenant Paul Anderson discovered that components from enemy electronic warfare systems could be modified to enhance human communication equipment beyond its normal capabilities. Staff Sergeant Carol Bennett found methods for using captured enemy armor materials to create defensive systems that were actually more effective than what the enemy forces were using. She combined the advanced materials with human design principles to create hybrid systems that provided better protection while being easier to manufacture and maintain. Within 2 weeks, the supposedly inferior human force was not only matching the technological capabilities of their opponents, but had begun surpassing them. The humans had taken advanced technology and somehow made it work better than the people who had originally developed it. They were learning faster than their enemies could develop new countermeasures. Kethvar observed that humans possessed something he had never encountered in other species. They seemed to understand technology at an intuitive level that allowed them to see possibilities that escaped the original creators. When Sergeant Martinez's unit captured an enemy armored vehicle, they did not just learn to operate it. They found ways to make it faster, more heavily armed, and more reliable than the factory specifications indicated was possible. The xenobiologist realized that human technological adaptation was not just rapid, it was exponential. Each captured system taught them principles that they applied to multiple other technologies. Every improvement they made led to discoveries that enabled even more advanced developments. They were using enemy technology as a foundation for innovations that exceeded anything their opponents possessed. Most frightening of all was the human attitude toward this technological arms race. Commander Lisa Brooks and Captain Nick Foster displayed what could only be described as excitement about the challenge of overcoming technological disadvantages. They spoke about captured enemy systems the way other species discussed fascinating puzzles or entertaining games. The humans were not just adapting enemy technology for military necessity. They appeared to genuinely enjoy the process of understanding how things worked and finding ways to make them work better. Technology was not just a tool for them. It was a form of creative expression that engaged their problem-solving instincts. After 6 weeks of conflict, the human force that had started with inferior equipment was dominating engagements against opponents who still possessed numerical and industrial advantages. The technological gap had not only been eliminated, it had been reversed. The humans were now deploying systems that were more advanced than anything their enemies could field. The enemy force, which had expected easy victory through technological superiority, found themselves increasingly outmatched by opponents who seemed to improve their capabilities with each engagement. Their advanced weapons became liabilities as humans learned to counter them and turn their own technological advantages against them. Kethavar made a disturbing discovery when he analyzed the broader implications of what he had observed. The humans were not just winning this particular conflict through rapid technological adaptation. They were using the conflict as an opportunity to advance their overall technological capabilities far beyond what they had possessed before the fighting began. The xenobiologist realized that every time humans encountered superior technology, they did not just learn to match it. They used it as a stepping stone to develop even more advanced systems. Warfare was serving as a form of accelerated technological evolution that pushed human capabilities forward at an unprecedented rate. As he reviewed his data, Kethavar began to understand that human military conflicts were not just about territorial conquest or resource control. They were mechanisms for forcing rapid technological and tactical advancement that made the entire species more capable with each generation. The truly terrifying implication was that humans seemed to become more dangerous every time someone tried to use superior technology against them. They were using their enemies' advantages as raw materials for their own development in ways that made them stronger than they had been before the conflict started. 6 months into his observation mission, Kethavar made a discovery that filled him with a dread unlike anything he had experienced in his long career. While monitoring routine human military communications, he accidentally intercepted transmissions about theoretical warfare scenarios and contingency planning. What he learned made him realize that everything he had observed represented humans operating under significant self-imposed limitations. The communications involved high-level military planners discussing potential responses to hypothetical threats that exceeded current human capabilities. General Rick Palmer was coordinating with various specialists to develop responses to scenarios involving superior alien technology, overwhelming numerical disadvantages, and total warfare situations that had never actually occurred on Earth. Dr. Sarah Williams, a specialist in what humans called weapons research, presented data showing that human scientists had deliberately chosen not to develop certain technologies because they considered them too dangerous for regular use. She described weapons concepts that could affect entire planetary populations, methods for disrupting biological systems on a species-wide scale, and something called mutually assured destruction that involved the complete elimination of enemy civilizations. Kethavar realized with growing horror that the crude chemical explosives and projectile weapons he had been observing were not examples of human technological limitations. They were conscious choices to use restrained methods that allowed for controlled conflict resolution without threatening planetary survival. Humans possessed the knowledge to create far more devastating weapons, but had agreed among themselves not to deploy them. The xenobiologist discovered that human military doctrine included concepts that were completely foreign to galactic understanding. They had developed strategies for fighting opponents with superior technology that involved using an enemy's own infrastructure against them. They called this asymmetric warfare, and it involved turning an opponent's advantages into liabilities through creative application of basic principles. Major Kevin Scott presented research showing that humans had identified methods for defeating space-capable civilizations using only planet-based resources. The strategies involved manipulating enemy supply lines, exploiting technological dependencies, and using psychological warfare techniques that could destabilize entire societies without direct military engagement. Most disturbing of all, Keth Var learned that humans were aware they were being observed. Intelligence officer Captain Joe Roberts had detected his monitoring station within days of his arrival in their system. Analyst Linda Hayes had been tracking his communication intercepts and had developed a comprehensive profile of his observation, capabilities, and mission parameters. The humans had known about his presence from the beginning but had chosen not to interfere with his surveillance. Instead, they had been carefully managing what he was allowed to observe while using his monitoring activities as a source of information about galactic civilization and military capabilities. They had turned his spy mission into their own intelligence. Gathering operation, Captain Roberts revealed that human intelligence services had been analyzing Kethvar's communication patterns to learn about alien technology, galactic military organization, and the political structure of the council system. Every report he sent back to his superiors provided them with additional information about potential threats and opportunities beyond their solar system. The humans had been conducting counter-surveillance while pretending to be unaware of his observation. They knew exactly what he was recording and had been deliberately demonstrating specific capabilities while concealing others. Everything he had witnessed had been carefully managed to create particular impressions about human military potential. Dr. Williams explained that human leadership had decided to use the observation mission as an opportunity to send messages to the galactic community. They wanted other species to understand that humans could be valuable allies, but would be extremely dangerous enemies. The displays of tactical flexibility and technological adaptation had been performances designed to influence galactic perceptions. Kethvar discovered that humans had used his surveillance to map the communication networks and technological capabilities of his observation equipment. Engineer Patricia Lee had reverse-engineered his cloaking systems and sensor arrays by analyzing their electromagnetic signatures. The humans now possessed detailed technical information about advanced galactic technology that they were already incorporating into their own development programs. The most shocking revelation was that humans had been preparing for eventual contact with galactic civilization for decades. They had developed contingency plans for diplomatic, economic, and military relationships with alien species. They understood that joining the galactic community would require demonstrating both their value as partners and their deterrent capability as potential opponents. Colonel Sandra Adams revealed that human military planning included scenarios for defending Earth against space-based attacks, conducting interplanetary warfare, and establishing human presence throughout their local galactic region. They had been developing these capabilities in secret while maintaining the appearance of a primitive civilization focused only on terrestrial conflicts. The humans had sophisticated understanding of galactic politics and military capabilities based on decades of careful observation and analysis. They knew about the council system, the technological capabilities of major species, and the economic relationships that maintained galactic stability. They had been preparing to join this community as equals rather than subjects. Kethvar realized that his mission had been compromised from the beginning, and that he had become an unwitting participant in human intelligence operations. Every piece of information he had gathered about human capabilities had been carefully selected to create specific impressions while concealing the full scope of their actual potential. The xenobiologist understood that humans had used his observation mission to learn everything they needed to know about galactic civilization, while revealing only what they chose to reveal about themselves. They had gained strategic intelligence about potential allies and threats while maintaining operational security about their true capabilities. As he prepared his final report, Kethvar realized that the galactic community was about to encounter something unprecedented in their long history of contact with emerging civilizations. These humans were not primitive creatures stumbling toward space travel. They were a sophisticated military power that had been carefully preparing for galactic contact while maintaining the appearance of technological inferiority. As Kethvar prepared his final report after 8 months of observation, he finally understood the true magnitude of what the Council had done by assigning him to watch humans at war. His mission had not been routine surveillance of a primitive species. It had been an inadvertent intelligence operation that provided Earth's military with everything they needed to know about galactic civilization while revealing the terrifying scope of human military potential. The xenobiologist realized that humans represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Every other species the Council had encountered followed predictable patterns of development. They became more peaceful as they grew more advanced, focusing their efforts on trade, exploration, and cultural development. Warfare became less important as civilizations matured and joined the galactic community as cooperative partners. Humans appeared to follow the opposite pattern. The more advanced they became, the more sophisticated their military capabilities grew. They had not outgrown warfare as their civilization developed. Instead, they had refined it into a precise tool for solving complex problems and achieving strategic objectives that other species could not even comprehend. Commander Steve Davis revealed in intercepted communications that human military planners had used Kethvar's observation mission to develop detailed intelligence profiles of major galactic powers. They now understood the technological capabilities, military doctrines, economic dependencies, and political relationships that maintained stability throughout the galactic community. The humans had learned that most galactic species possessed superior individual technologies but lacked the adaptive flexibility and innovative capacity that characterized human military operations. They had identified specific vulnerabilities in galactic defense systems and had developed methods for exploiting these weaknesses using techniques that no other species had ever attempted. Agent Mike Foster and technician Carol Peterson had been monitoring Kethvar's communications with the Council throughout his entire mission. They had analyzed every report he filed and had used this information to map the command structure, communication protocols, and decision-making processes of galactic military organization. The humans now possessed comprehensive intelligence about galactic civilization that they had acquired without revealing their own true capabilities. They knew which species controlled which technologies, which alliances existed between different powers, and which strategic resources were essential for maintaining galactic stability. Most frightening of all, Kethvar discovered that humans had been testing their own capabilities against galactic technology throughout his observation period. They had been deliberately exposing themselves to his advanced sensors and communication systems to understand how galactic surveillance methods worked and how they could be countered or deceived. Dr. Patricia Lee had reverse-engineered his cloaking technology and had developed methods for detecting and tracking similar systems. Human intelligence services now possessed the ability to monitor galactic military activities using techniques that other species would not recognize or be able to counter. The xenobiologist realized that by assigning him to observe human warfare, the Council had accidentally provided Earth with a complete intelligence briefing about galactic military capabilities and political organization. The humans had gained strategic advantages that would normally take centuries of careful diplomatic contact to acquire. Kethvar understood that humans now faced a critical decision point that would determine the future relationship between Earth and the galactic community. They could choose to use their newly acquired intelligence to prepare for peaceful integration as junior partners in galactic civilization. Or they could use it to prepare for military expansion as a conquering power that viewed the galaxy as territory to be claimed rather than a community to be joined. The terrifying aspect of human psychology was that they seemed to view these options as equivalent strategic choices rather than moral decisions. Captain Roberts had discussed both possibilities with equal analytical detachment, treating peaceful diplomacy and military conquest as alternative methods for achieving the same objective of securing human interests in galactic affairs. General Palmer revealed that human military planning included scenarios for both cooperative and hostile relationships with galactic powers. They had developed strategies for joining existing political structures as allies and for replacing those structures with systems that better served human objectives. They treated war and diplomacy as complementary tools rather than opposing alternatives. The humans had concluded that galactic civilization was essentially peaceful because no species had ever posed a genuine military threat to the established order. They suspected that the current balance of power existed not because of superior wisdom or evolved ethics, but because no civilization had ever developed the combination of technological capability and strategic thinking necessary to challenge the existing system. Kethavar realized that humans might be the first species in galactic history with both the ability and the inclination to test whether the peaceful nature of galactic civilization was a choice or simply the result of military limitations that no one had ever overcome. As he composed his final report, the xenobiologist struggled to find words that would adequately convey the danger that the Council had accidentally created. By sending him to observe humans at war, they had provided a military power with intelligence capabilities, strategic planning resources, and technological insights that could destabilize the entire galactic community. His final entry read, "Assignment. Complete but mission compromised from initial contact. Humans are not a primitive species requiring observation and guidance. They are a sophisticated military power that has been preparing for galactic expansion while maintaining operational security about their true capabilities. Recommendation: immediate diplomatic contact with full recognition of human strategic equality and strong emphasis on cooperative partnership. Alternative recommendation: complete avoidance of further contact and establishment of quarantine protocols around human space. Under no circumstances should the galactic community take any action that could be interpreted as threatening human interests. They do not fight wars to acquire territory or resources. They fight wars to solve problems. We must ensure that we never become a problem they decide needs to be solved."